Hello everyone, my name is Oprah Bennett and today I'm going to be speaking about immigration. And I just wanted to know how many of you have a relative that was born in another country. Okay, is that relative living in the US currently? Well, so that relative is an immigrant, so now can you imagine a society without them? Okay, well, so today these are my key points. I'll be going over the history of immigration, immigration laws, and immigration's impact on the U.S. currently and for the future. And I have my own personal experience with immigration as I'm from a different country. I was born in Jamaica. And I'll tell you a little bit about that before I start. So I moved to the U.S. in 2011, and that was because my dad had filed for me. The process took around 6 months. I did different things, like I had to go do a medical, I had to go through like 8 different interviews, and I had to do like this DNA testing to prove that like I was my dad's child. And so it was a long process, but it was actually really like sped up for me because a lot of people, like if you're filing for a parent or a sibling, it can take up to years. But if you're filing for a spouse or a child, preferably a minor, it can take around 6 months. So it really depends on your situation, but they give priority to children and spouses. And that was kind of my experience with immigration. At first, I didn't really understand it because I was young back then, but looking back at it, I thought it was a little bit drawn out, but it was necessary to vet out like who's coming into the country. So I'll go into the history of immigration. So naturally there was the original Americans were Native Americans, and they're thought to originate from they're thought to originate from Northeast Asia, which they crossed over like a land bridge between Alaska and Siberia and moved into the Americas, as they originally had colonized the Americas first. And then there was the initial Americans, which were like Europeans, and those Europeans were like the Spaniards and the French. And at first they had claimed the U.S. to be called the United States. That's where the United States originated from. And when they had came to the U.S., it was initially for economic purposes, and then it was for religious freedom. So initially, when it was economic opportunities, they had first settled in Jamestown, Virginia, and then around like a century later, they had came for the religious freedom aspect, and that was they settled in Massachusetts. However, though they were all immigrants, the Spaniards and the French, there was also African slaves that were immigrants, but they're immigrants by force, not necessarily by choice. And then there was the Germans, because later on there was like 5 million Germans and 4.5 million Irishes that had originated, and then around 25,000 Chinese that had also migrated for the California Gold Rush. And that's kind of just like the history of how the different type of ethnic groups and races had came to the United States. So next we're going to move to immigration laws. And there's actually 6 categories that immigration breaks their laws into. And first it's family-based, which I was trying to say, that was kind of my experience, where I was telling you about how the fact that I had to go through it 6 months But if it was someone else, it could be anywhere between 5 to 10 years as far as a sibling or a parent. And then there's employment based, which basically means that you have a valuable skill to the U.S. So they'll also speed up your processing because they would like to utilize your skill in the country. And there's also a per country ceiling, which is basically that the U.S. doesn't allow more than 7% of the total amount of immigrants to come in that year, so that one country doesn't dominate the amount that's supposed to come. So they all have a ceiling to meet, and that's called the per country ceiling, which is 7%. And then there's the refugees and exiles, which is basically you're harmed and you are seeking you're seeking protection in another country because it's not exactly safe in your country. But there's also other humanitarian reliefs, which is broken down into categories. And that's the temporary protected status and the deferred euphoried, DED. So the temporary protected status is used for a natural disaster. So that would be another humanitarian relief. And the deferred euphoried would be protection because your country is also unstable in another aspect. But they all lead to a U.S. citizenship in the end, which is what most people aim for. And that can take, for you to acquire a U.S. citizenship, you need a green card, and usually that's, you need to hold a green card for 3 to 5 years. And that 3 years is usually if you're a minor, or you're a spouse, or you're in the military. But if it's 5 years, that means that you claim residency through employment, or you're a sibling or a parent. So the consequences of not illegally going through one of those categories would be deportation or prosecution. And usually it most likely will end in deportation immediately, because the U.S. usually doesn't want to have to prosecute you and spend a lot of money on you in the prison system, when they could just deport you back to your country, and then that wouldn't be necessarily their problem. Okay, now the impact that immigrants have on the U.S. are significant. These are just some facts that I pulled to show how significant they are. So basically 24% of the patents that were founded were by immigrants in the U.S., and 28% of the doctoral degrees are awarded in all fields are awarded to immigrants. So they utilize the education system pretty well, because most immigrants all come to the U.S. to have a better life for not just themselves but their families, and build a future. So a lot of immigrants move here to get an education. So it wasn't a surprise to see that they had utilized the education system so well. They're also 15% of the nation's labor force, and that's just counting immigrants that are directly from another country. That's not counting immigrants of children that were born in the U.S. but are children of immigrants. So that's not included them either. So I'm just going to wrap up and give you another fact of the fact that 1 out of 8 immigrants have an advanced degree, and immigrants usually work in all types of jobs or have claimed all types of jobs, so it's pretty integrated. And immigrants are really the foundation that builds the U.S. because without immigrants, there would be no consumers, and there also wouldn't be any as much job force in the U.S. either. So immigration is a vital part of what keeps the United States running and progressing, and not just the United States, globally. All countries utilize immigrants to better the country's economic welfare. So I guess I'll just wrap up to say that as an immigrant myself, I've been living here for around 6 years, and it's definitely different from the country that I came from, and I'm happy that I got the opportunity to come here and make something of myself instead of being denied to do that. But also, I feel like I'm glad that I did it the legal way instead of, because it avoids a lot of unnecessary problems had I had done it illegally. And though a lot of people can't say the same, I know that like in the end that I wouldn't have been as successful as I am now if I didn't do it the way I had before, because it would have caused a lot of problems that I didn't necessarily want to go through. So thank you for listening to my speech.